From our perspective, looks at the lives and behaviors of millennials, Generation Z, and the changes that are happening in our 21st century and the innovators that are making it happen. We will explore trends, technology, music, fashion, social media, business, science, the arts, faith, and lifestyle. So come join us on Comcast, Verizon, and online.
And a lot of individuals and families don't have the leverage of going, oh, I can go back home, right?
Mhm.
Or maybe your job is then paying for your siblings to go to school, right? Or it's paying for your mother's health insurance or your dad's stuff. Like that's a whole different type of scenario, which then deals much more with the social and economic conditions of our environment that force people to remain within like the machine labor industrial complex system that we live in, right? So and that kind of gets into the theme, just to pivot back to you, of why the fluttering even might happen sometimes. Because to flutter, it means that you're not ready to like, you might not be making a living off of your fluttering at that point, right? Do you have people that can support you in that interim? Do you have your basic needs met? And so it just opens the door for a whole other list of questions on conditions that I think have shifted quite drastically economically, um, from the 70s to where we are now in the 20s of the 21st century.
As we say in the scriptures, the older teaching the younger, um, and let them know that it's okay to try. It's okay to even make those mistakes. Stepping out, making those mistakes, because I think what happens sometimes, even in the mistakes, it can hinder us, especially if those mistakes are expensive, right? Expensive isn't only monetary. Expenses, and I'm saying this to our viewing audience, right? Could be, I went to college, but I did not expect to get pregnant. And now I have to raise this child, right? And therefore the capacity in which I have to do that is requiring me to either drop out of college, and find work and do college part-time or whatever it is. And even also it may mean that I have to move back home, get family to help me with this. There's so many capacities. Another could be health-wise. I did not expect to have this chronic illness that is requiring me to, not do, not be able um, to reach my goal in a 2 years, instead of 2 years, I may have to take 4 years because I have to take care of my health. And that means, going to the doctors, medication wise, taking breaks because I can't do the capacity, all these different things can cause us to have to take that stock on where we are and where we want to go and do adjustments. So to answer that question from my perspective, um, having a support network will help with that, understanding who your support network should be. I think even before you reach the crisis, you should really understand who you have around you and who you can trust and who you know that you can rely on if in the future something happens. You know what I'm saying? Um, because I think sometimes when things are good, we don't take stock of that. Everybody's our friend, but some of these individuals may not be the best, you know, person to be that, because you're saying when the rubber hits the road, those people you thought that you could trust on, they're not there. So did you do that valuation prior to even reaching to that, the unsuspected? Because things happen, right? So one of the things that I value is friendship. One of the things that I look at in myself is to be that friend, right? And understanding, um, who it is that you surround yourself with, because they can also help you reach your destiny, because you're not an island by yourself. Um, but then you can also help them reach their destiny. So you have to be that friend that will help others as well as they being the friend that will help you. That's one my take on that as well, on this question. What can be done about it in reference to us helping those who, just become downcasted about the whole situation, because it takes a lot. You have the capacity to dust your feet and get back up. Stephanie, what do you think about that?
No, I was just listening to you, what you were talking about, and I was listening to what Matthew was talking about earlier in terms of the realities of having a backup, a nest to come back to. Because in my own reflection at that time, my mother was widowed and she was really more so of a housewife. So I had to succeed. I didn't have that
Right,
option to go back. I was out and it had to work.
right,
So, so that is a different drive,
yeah,
that is a different drive than knowing in the back that there may be something. It's like, no, regardless, it's I got to stay on my feet because now I'm independent and it's got to remain that way.
yeah, yeah.
Um, because the investment was, getting me to this point. So now it's me. I got to go.
And that's a lot of people.
I can't flutter.
Yeah, yeah, and unfortunately, that's a lot of people. And I'm going to bring in to the Caribbean now, because it's another place that this um, viewership is also in the islands. Um,
Mhm.
a lot of that a lot of them don't have that capacity to have that financial backup, right? And the options of choices, and that's the other thing that we're going to look at right now in reference to the options that are available to Generation Z and millennials. And a lot of it is online, right? Um, as to, I don't have to choose a career path that will require me to do the 9 to 5. I can make my own 9 to 5, or 6 to 12, or however it is, because I've chosen to do social media, or I've chosen to do my business online.
Sure. If you don't
Um,
mind me just jumping in on something that you're saying presently, Carlene and my mother said, um, you brought up something of trust, right? And knowing who you can go to. And if I'm going to stick in this like failure to flying kind of metaphor that we're living in,
yeah,
the trust element is really unique because it's also learning who to trust with different elements of your journey too, right?
yeah,
I think sometimes when we hear, can I trust them? It's like, well, they're great for picking me up when I need someone to get me from the airport, and that is its own form of trust. But maybe that's not the ideal person to be a thought partner with when you're really early and trying to make a pivot, right? It's knowing different individuals, I think, in your circles, knowing their value. Like I know when I was making a pivot from finance to music, my mom knows this. I have a lot of close friends, I'm a pretty social guy, but I couldn't necessarily talk to everyone the same way that I would talk to them before because they knew me in a certain form. They knew at the time finance, Matt. Well, I'm slowly making a pivot and my ideas are pretty premature. It's almost like exposing a baby too soon to the world around you. It's like if you expose a baby too quickly, it can get incredibly sick. It can be harmful and almost somewhat dangerous because I was building my own confidence in the direction I was pivoting to. So then there's just question. I also it's a dynamic sense of trusting, of knowing who in your life and your family, your friends, your bosses, former employers, coworkers, who are individuals where if I'm insecure about a move I'm thinking about, or I'm just questioning, I can go to them and they'll give me space to just to share openly with what is happening in a way that we can then build from and move forward with. You know what I mean? Who are the friends where I'm trying to make something move and I have to put motion to something that are super practical and they're like, well, if you're going to do it, you need one, two, three, four, five. They're almost like strategic consultants. And I think having trust on more of a swivel type of dynamic really helps with um, learning to fly as a concept. And then To my mother's point, I think for parents, particularly whose kids maybe are looking to do a pivot, maybe they're moving in a direction that makes them nervous. Like I recognize I was in a very blessed and privileged position, and both my father and mother, they had no qualms with me coming back home. There was a trust that was already there in me as a person, right? That like if Matt's coming back, it's to figure things out, come back with a purpose. 'Cause I have a lot of other friends where it's like you're not coming back home, even if they have capacity, right? And every parenting model is different. I'm very grateful that my parents kind of had that type of framework and thought around kids returning to the house. Because at that point, I was 23, 24. Like like I said, I could have been out in an apartment on my own, but that space was really a parental thing. So for the guardians, the parents, the uncles or aunties, the grandparents that maybe have capacity, it's just so long I think as their children or those that they were formerly caring for have a plan, or at least are being honest with where they're looking to move, then to me it's more of a question of trusting in that motion or pivot and that move coming forward. And for those that maybe don't have any of those things, I think Anthony's point is super salient because so many of the pivots you'll see on social media is destination land most of the time. Like LinkedIn, IG, that's why people like TikTok so much because TikTok is a bit more raw. You get people just in their random apartment talking about something and you're seeing the journey in it. But I think for those that are really caught up and maybe down, heavy, depressed, because it's like, I don't have a safety net. My job is draining my time, all these things. Um, I'm Christian by background, and so faith is a massive part. And I do believe that steps of faith, no matter how big the step, have massive implications on future movement and momentum. If you can do 5 minutes more a day on that one thing you're trying to pivot to, it's like compounding interest. That 5 minutes compounds over time. And that is where Anthony's word of loving the journey is so important because for a long time, the journey is all that you have. And if you really sit in it, the journey is all that you really are because the journey is what makes you into what you're becoming. And we're constantly becoming as people. So I would just encourage those that don't, maybe there's not the family resource, there's not the friend, you might not even have community. 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever that time can be. And try not to minimize the value of what 5 minutes or a short period can do. I used to do that. And when I would make pivots, my mom knows I can be very all or nothing. I swing my pendulum all the way to the other side. And I had to learn over time the value of small decisions of long-term linear consistency that then build confidence. And it tells me at these moments, there's something happening. There's movement happening. Okay, great. Then you're trusting in the consistency of the decision and not where you're going. And the relationship to self becomes very different. Because when you're trying to make certain pivots, trying to flutter all the words that we can throw into it, there's so much discouragement internally outside of even the things that you'll hear societally that really, lead to individuals not continuing to make that step, right? Maybe, you are someone that's like, oh, unexpected pregnancy or loved one got sick, so now things have to change. And that has been super helpful for me just in not minimizing small steps of faith and trusting in God that, God is a God of faith and there was never a thing of, I need you to have a full loaf of bread for me to multiply this. It was never like, I need a full jug of oil so that I can, multiply the oil. It's about the heart posturing towards, I have 5 minutes. I'm choosing to believe you, God, that this 5 minutes um, is all that I'll need for today. Um, so I'll pause there because I'm going on a little
I'm
soliloquy.
just
Oh,
saying
that's
amen.
awesome. That's
Yeah.
that's awesome. That's awesome. Now we're going to go into the different generations just really quickly. This choosing to age in place. Near family, these are the baby boomers. They want to, when they retire, they want to be able to walkable urban areas may also be returning to college towns for learning opportunities, sports, entertainment, hobbies. They tend to, as you know, because you're coming to that retirement spot, golfing, fishing, etc. But then health, and this is something that we spoke about, is a factor.
There's
Um,
something important though, that political activism is there for a reason, because that generation is very keen on political activism.
yes, political activism is one. It
Yeah.
was there, but
Hmm.
I think,
Hmm. Hmm.
let's see, let's go to the next. So work ethics, strong work ethics, as what you talked about, you know,
Single
resilience.
employer.
Yeah, yep, yep, we understand that. Mental health, they're saying that baby boomers have lower rates of major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder than Gen Z. And we're going to look into Gen Z as we talked about as to another factor as to understanding why they may see that as an issue as well. Um, and then they talked about some say baby boomers prioritize work over family, joy, freedom, adventure, and happiness. I think that's also kind of what you were saying, Stephanie, even for that generation, our generation, older generation, that this is what you were told to do. You're going to do it. While they say, and this is generalizing, of course, right?
Right, yes, yeah.
And others say baby boomers don't react well to new technology or when millennials disrupt the way things have always been. That is true to some extent. And we see it, and I've heard Gen Zers say that when they go to the workplace, the older generation could be very stick about, no, this is how we do it, this is how it's always been done, da da da. And the younger generation is coming in and saying, well, it could be done more efficiently this way, but hard to change. That could be a factor as well, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment on the
Baby
with the
boomers.
boomers on the yeah, with the caption on the mental health. I think that's twofold. One are, and you'll probably get into some of the issues that bring on more anxiety for the younger generation. There's more exposure, there's more technology. Back in our day, we didn't have any of that. You didn't know what everybody else was doing anywhere else but in your local community. You didn't even know what your friends were doing out of high school.
Mhm.
So there wasn't that whole comparison.
True.
There was a lot of stuff that comes into the younger generation that we just didn't have, right? The other thing is, there's this the statistics are probably skewed because in our generation, you didn't report issues. You just dealt with them internally. You didn't say you had anxiety. You didn't say those are things you didn't speak about. So they're probably they're so from that standpoint, they don't have the matrix to calculate because it wasn't disclosed. So it's twofold. That's all I
That's an
wanted to
excellent
comment.
point. Yeah, that's an excellent point. Gen X, 1965 to 1980, was saying self-reliant and independent, don't like to be micromanaged, good work-life balance, stable job. They expect employers to provide technology upgrades. They expect fair compensation, quick to leave a job if they feel they can get something better. Finances, concern about retirement, because you're getting to that stage too where the ones in the 65s and 70s where you're looking at retirement, worried they won't have enough savings. Um, and this was interesting. They have a lower, and this might be in your field, Matthew. They have a lower rate of using financial advisors than other generations. I could kind of attest to why that is the case. Let me just go on to the next part of Gen X. Um, Change. Some Gen Xers may be resistant to rapid change in the workplace, preferring stability, and then digital tools. While tech savvy, some Gen Xers may not be as inclined to embrace the latest digital tools as younger generation. So, going to the question of financing and the embracing of digital tools, I could see that being a factor in this generation as well. There's so much financial assistance that's online now, and financial advisors can cost a lot. That we have found other ways in which we can, that Generation X can utilize their finances and their ability to really navigate those tools that are out there to help with them with the finance. We talk about online banking. We talk about even now the banking system. they have those tools within the apps where you can budget, you can put aside for your Roth. You can even invest online safely. You can invest without even using an investor that doesn't cost any money. So those tools are out there. So that's why I believe that generation tends not to go directly to a financial manager to say, like in old school, here's my money, do with it what you want. And of course, what has happened now with the whole blockchain and crypto and all that stuff, that's a whole different ball game there where individuals are basically educating themselves. As you said, if you don't understand how to do it, just YouTube and. A video. Your thoughts, Matthew?
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't know that about Gen X from like a financial advisory perspective, only because a lot of, I mean, when I was working in finance or even consulting, a lot of the individuals I was with tended, I think, to have some type of financial advisor. So my network might have been skewed. But I don't really have a thesis on this, but I am curious what it would have also meant to, because if you're just 65 to 80, then it's 65, let's say 22 years, you're at 87 when you're graduating. Um, so that means you're kind of around in the 90s. I'm curious what even like the economic situation of the 90s looked like, given in the early 2000s, you had a massive dot-com bubble burst with tech that led to a lot of losses financially for families. You then, 7 years later, after the 2000s tech bubble, you then had the largest financial recession or the second largest, I think, that the US has seen since like the Great Depression, roughly. So I'm even wondering if maybe there were massive portfolio losses for that group that also created some level of maybe institutional distrust might be too strong, but might have just caused some shifts in relationships to like the advisory community. Because now, there's like post Dodd-Frank and other um like protection bureaus essentially that I don't know how prevalent these were in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Truly, if someone that watches this podcast knows, feel free to shoot us a message or something to keep us informed. But yeah, no, I'm very curious because that surprised me. I'm like, oh, really? Like, I almost feel like they would have more than baby boomers only because I feel like financial transparency grew. I mean, Mom, you probably know that better than I do.
I
So,
mean, I was surprised, but I wasn't, because I think some of the response that was just given by Carlene is correct in terms of having more access digitally to do things on your own, whereas the boomers just didn't have that. They didn't have that kind of individual access, and and people were in those their specific disciplines,
yeah, and I
and
guess you
so
couldn't
they
manage your own portfolio then.
you couldn't
There
manage
was
your
no
own
online. Yeah,
portfolio.
yeah, yeah, that's a good point.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So I think that really does have a lot to do with it, because I think if that were there, you'd have more boomers that would do it as well. Because it takes a certain person to actually disclose your finances to somebody else. And our generation was also more closed about stuff like that. Your younger generations are more open, and so I was, but I wasn't, because it makes sense to me. Also, too, not that there's a correlation, but there could be some. The boomer generations as a whole generationally have more wealth so than Gen X and the other, So I don't know, but I'm just saying, because they were in that whole mindset of saving for that day.
And you're right on that because the boomers, they will have the house. They would have had,
They have more wealth to pass on. Yeah,
yeah, and
yeah,
so that is a factor. But and also too, in reference to the Gen X population, um, the tools that are out there now are really
yeah.
catering to
Right.
understanding because the Gen Xers, they have entered into the world of technology because you're talking about like the
Hmm.
90s where
Hmm.
you're talking that the web was coming into being strong.
Hmm.
So they're comfortable with the technology to some
Hmm.
level.
Hmm.
And then now we're talking about the 2000s. There's a whole lot of that stuff out there now. You can basically, people purchasing homes online without even seeing it. I have friends who have purchased homes and never gone to the property. You know what I'm saying? and
I do.
sight unseen, and it's like a common thing. And I'm like, for me personally, I have to go and see. But I'm just saying that you're doing all that online.
Online, yeah.
Online.
I do think though that Generation X is moving back towards the financial advisor. You can see it in all the commercials and everything is marketing now because there is a concern that they won't have enough money saved up for retiring.
Millennials, stresses that millennials face can have toll on their mental health. They were saying that employment challenges, and some say that they lack skills that employers want. Cost of living, minimum wage versus inflation and cost of living. Minimum wage versus inflation. Um, see, incarceration among millennials, young adults, are higher than they were for members of the silent generations and boomers at the same age. Other challenges are college debt, aging parents, discrimination, substance addictions, violence, bullying, and less human interaction. That's the reason for the increase in mental health. Then here, some millennials have mastered the art of doing what they love and making money at it, which can make it seem as though they aren't working hard and making the same sacrifice that previous generations have made. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is it's an interesting slide. Can we go backwards one to
It
the
is an
prior one?
interesting.
It's there's I mean I do think for the millennial generation that there's a very large underestimating of just how much inflation has grown and moved and scaled. And just even like the starting costs of a like real value dollars of the 70s were higher than real value dollars now. If you look at nominally, yes, there have been nominal growth, but like, even the starting moves to acquire property, incredibly challenging. I think there's also a unique situation in the millennial period because you had the 2000s bubble at early stages in their journey. You then have the late 2000s recession that occurred. At the same time, you have the massive like wars, at least for US citizens in the Middle East. And then you also have COVID, which is tied to that too, which massively shifted the workforce as well and how people operate. So it's a really, I mean, I am a millennial, so I think it's been a very unique time, but the grounds that I think we're entering into, I think there's more awareness of mental health challenges to what my mother was saying earlier. I think people are more comfortable talking about mental health difficulties and are more forthright and honest about it. Where, if I'm thinking about people I know in prior generations, in talking to them, I would venture and say, I actually think you're probably clinically depressed or have a massive anxiety problem. But that language is just like inaccessible language to that period. I think we're a bit more honest and forthright in be it podcasts, social media, even just in healthcare in general. There's just been so much investment put into stress on the body, stress on the mind, chronic conditions, and all those things. So that's definitely a part of things, but I see it more on a continuum of factors of stress always being present, but the awareness and language to communicate on these things, again, partially through technology and just having the internet and being able to Google research like these are symptoms I'm dealing with, then finding other people through forums or small pages on Facebook, MySpace, now Instagram and TikTok, where it's like you just have more micro communities, if you will, to where I think, mental health topics kick up a lot more.